Welcome, spooky souls, to the final Christmas season episode of Let's Talk Spooky. I am your host, Shauna, and tonight we're going to explore some of the creatures that are not what you would think would be associated with Christmas. Some of these creatures are downright terrifying, and others, well, I'll let you decide. But before we get into tonight's episode, I do want to give a shout out to all of my new followers, and to those who have been supporting the show since it first started. I am so grateful to you all, and I love seeing your supportive comments, so thank you. My little podcast is slowly starting to grow, and over the last few months, I have seen your support, so thank you so much. And if you love Let's Talk Spooky, share it with your friends. Hit that follow button and help us build our little community. So, if you are ready, let's explore the folklore creatures that we won't likely be telling stories of to our children this Christmas. And as always, light a candle, get cozy, and let's talk spooky. Our first creature might not sound menacing for all you cat lovers out there, but this might not be the cat you want to let in on a cold night. The Yule Cat is said to appear during Yule, stalking farms and settlements at the darkest point of winter. It's enormous, larger than most ordinary animals, and it moves silently through the snow and darkness. But the creepiest part is that it watches in windows for those who have earned the right to survive the season. Unlike many folklore creatures, the Yule Cat doesn't punish mortal failure. It punishes idleness. For centuries, Icelandic communities depended on the shearing of sheep stock for survival. If sheep were not sheared, and wool was not spun, and clothes were not provided for the community, well, the likelihood of survival in harsh temperatures was jeopardized. So this survival all depended on everybody contributing to finish essential work before the cold set in. Spinning wool, preparing clothes, preserving food were the main priorities, and anybody who failed to contribute, especially children, placed the entire household and community at risk. You see, new clothes back then were not a luxury like they are today. They were proof of labor. They were proof that the cat looked for. Those who completed their work were rewarded with new garments at Yule, and those who didn't, they were said to be the most vulnerable. And the vulnerability, that's what the cat was looking for. And that's where our story begins. In the years when winter came early and left late, there lived a family at the edge of the valley where the wind never fully rested. Their house was small, low to the ground, and built to keep warmth in and danger out. And every member of their family worked from the first frost onward. You see, work was not a matter of pride, it was a matter of survival. The mother of the home, Asla, spun wool each evening by firelight until her fingers cracked and bled. Her husband mended tools and salted meat, counting stores again and again, knowing that a single miscalculation could mean hunger by spring. And they had 2 children. The eldest, John, he worked quietly without complaint. But their youngest, Aline, she didn't. But Aline was not wicked. She was not trouble. She was a gentle soul with a dreamy disposition, slow to begin tasks and quick to abandon them. When asked to spin wool, she tangled it. When told to clean, she lingered. She promised she would finish her work later, but she never did. And later, that was a dangerous word when winter was at bay. As Yule drew closer, the village grew anxious. Doors began to shut earlier, fires were banked lower, and elders reminded children that no household was safe unless all the work was done. Because they knew what was coming. The cat. It's said that it comes down from the mountains and the hillsides when the snow lay deep and the moon is thin. That it could see who'd earned their place in the warmth of the home and who had not. New clothes were laid out on the last night before Yule, not as gifts but as proof, a visible sign that the hands of the household had not been idle. Asla and John's coats were finished first, and then her husband's, and then her own. Each garment lay carefully underneath the hearth, but Aline's remained half spun beneath the bench. On the final evening before Yule, Asla called her daughter and sat next to her. "You must finish," she whispered to her daughter, and placed the unfinished bundle in her hands. "Before the fire burns low, you must finish." Aline tried, but she was so tired and her fingers were fumbling. The wool twisted and broke. She cried, ashamed and exhausted. And at last, exhaustion won, and she fell asleep beside the fire with her work still undone. And that night, the wind rose. Something moved quietly, gliding between homes outside. Sheep pressed themselves together in their pen. Dogs didn't bark for fear, and the wind carried a sound like fabric slowly being pulled across ice. Asa woke with a chill and listened. She heard it, but no knock came, no cry, no scratch, only a weight as if something circled the house, measuring it. By morning, the wind had stilled, the hearth was cold. Aline's place beside the fire was empty. There were no tracks in the snow, no sign of a struggle, and the door had not been opened. The elders came and they looked and they said nothing. They did not search the hills for her. They did not speak the cat's name aloud. They helped Asa fold the coats that remained and told her what she had already known. The Yule Cat only took those whose work had not been finished. And in the years that follow, no child in the valley ever left their work undone again. And when Yule approached, even when their hands ached, even when their eyes burned with sleepiness, they finished their task, because winter was not merciful, and the cat was winter. Stories like this one were commonly told to Icelandic children to ensure that obedience was met and the work was completed when winter was approaching. But the Yule Cat didn't always roam alone, and if its presence wasn't terrifying enough, well, its owner sure was. And she might make this Christmas kitty look like a tame house cat. Grýla was known in more folklores as an ogress, a witch who descended from the mountains during Yule to, yes, eat misbehaving children. Grýla predates Christianity by centuries and is rooted in one of the older beliefs about winter. She is a consequence of famine and disorder. But Grýla is not subtle. She is described as monstrous, enormous, and ravishingly hungry. A figure who collects children who failed to behave and cooks them in her stew that she then serves to her 13 sons, known as the Yule lads. Her stories are intentionally brutal, meant to terrify children into obedience during the most dangerous season of the year. And they're also created to explain things that many families couldn't. Why crops would fail, why children would disappear in snow-covered mountains, and most of all, she stood as a symbol of obedience in a harsh and deep, disobedient winter. The Yule Cat was a functional extension of her. Where Grýla takes children who were disobedient, the Yule Cat targeted those who were idle. Together, they formed a complete system of winter enforcement, one punishing behavior and the other punishing failure to work. In this way, the Yule Cat wasn't merely a monster. It's Grýla's instrument, her prowling counterpart. Over the years, Icelandic folk creatures have been softened and shaped into something a little bit more digestible, culturally accepting, and approachable. But their roots were as deep and dark as the winter nights in Iceland. And now they aren't forgotten. Stories of Grýla and the Yule Cat are still told to children today. Maybe softened, but if you are from Iceland and you have a story or an experience of the Yule Cat, I'd love to hear about it. Alright, not all winter creatures, though, waited for failure to show themselves. And this next winter creature, it arrived whether you were ready for it or not. Krampus belongs to the Alpine regions of Europe, particularly known as Austria, Bavaria, and parts of southern Germany, where the winters were long, brutal, and unforgiving. His origin reaches back to pre-Christianity and is spun from a pagan belief of a horned nature spirit, a winter demon, and a figure associated with death, fertility, and the underworld that is believed to roam during Advent and the Christmas season. And his job was to enforce order. When Christianity spread through the region, Krampus was not necessarily erased. He was absorbed. Rather than ruling winter outright, he was paired with a more acceptable counterpart, which I'm sure you can guess. We all know now as Santa, or St. Nicholas. It was his yin to the yang, in a way that softened and integrated this monstrous creature into modern-day households. There is a judgment divided between reward and punishment. St. Nicholas offered the gifts, but Krampus, he enforced the consequences. But beneath the Christian framing, Krampus still remained what he had always been, a winter enforcer. Krampus punished misbehaving, especially towards children who were disobedient, cruel, and lazy. In some traditions, he beat offenders with a switch, which would be like a bunch of sticks. In darker tellings, he carried them away in his sack or basket and removed them from the household entirely. Whether those children returned or not depended on the version of the story being told. But it was threat enough. Krampus enforced obedience not through chaos, but through certainty. His arrival meant a consequence was coming, and it was no longer an abstract thought. Winter had noticed you, and in this next folktale I want to share, it shows just what happens when a children doesn't listen to the warnings of their elders. In the mountain village of Oberdorf, winter arrived before anybody was ready for it. The snow had come early that year, swallowing the path between the houses and sealing the edge of the forest beneath ice. Smoke from chimneys hung low on rooftops, and every door was tight and shut by nightfall. The villagers spoke little once Advent passed. They conserved their warmth and their words alike. Everybody knew what the night was bringing, so they prepared the way their parents had taught them. The fires were banked low, the shoes were lined neatly by the door, and the children were kept indoors as night fell. Their voices hushed even when laughter tried to escape them. All except one. Matthias had never believed in the stories. He was old enough now that he thought to know better. Old enough to understand that the bells were only bells and the chains were only tools. And the fear that something invented to keep children obedient, well, that was just folktales. He had listened to the warnings with half an ear, smiling when his mother crossed herself and told him to stay close to the hearth that night. "I'll only look," he said, "just to see." But when the bells first sounded, they came from far away, and they were faint and uneven. They seemed to carry themselves across the wind like an echo that didn't quite belong. Other children in the home froze. But Matthias, he leaned forward as the bells grew louder. They weren't rhythmic, they weren't cheerful. Each note rang slightly out of time with the next, as though something heavy was dragging them along unwillingly. "Stay inside," his mother warned with a voice that was tight. "Do not answer. Do not follow." But his curiosity was louder than caution. And when the bells passed the far houses, Matthias, well, he slipped out the door without shoes, the cold biting his feet as he moved through the snow. The sound pulled him, and each step was careful. He moved down the narrow path that led to the forest, and he didn't see anything at first. Only then did he hear the chains. They scraped softly against the stone and frozen earth, deliberate and unhurried. Whatever carried them was not in a rush, and it knew where it was going. Matthias followed the sound past the houses, past the fence, and past where no one went after dark. The bells were close now, but Matthias followed the sound past the last house, past where the fence ended and the bells drew close. The forest opened before him, and the black branches clawed at the night sky. The sound stopped, and for the first time since he had left the house, he felt afraid. The silence pressed around him, thick and watchful. The wind had died, and his breath was cold. The bells rang again, not ahead of him, but behind him. Matthias turned, and what he saw at the edge of the trees shocked him. At first, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. It was a tall figure, hunched, but the outline shifted like shadows, half formed, half smoke. Horns began to carve upwards on its head, catching the faintness of the moonlight. Dark fur hung around its shoulders, matted with snow and frost. Chains looped around its body, dragging slowly as it stepped forward. In one hand, it held a bundle of sticks, and in the other, a sack that seemed to already hang heavy against its side. When the breath steamed clouds around its face, Matthias took a breath of fear in. The bells hung from its waist, still ringing softly now. Matthias tried to speak, but nothing came out, and the figure, it didn't move. It didn't raise its voice. It did not seem threatened. It stood there, waiting patient as much as the winter itself would. Being able to move suddenly, Matthias backed away, his heels catching in the snow, and he fell hard, hitting his head against the cold ice that bit his skin. When he looked up again, the figure was closer now, standing above him. He understood then, not in words but in instinct, that the stories his mother had told had never been to create fear and obedience. They had been true, and they were about choice. You see, Krampus, he didn't hurt children. He waited for them to come to him. And when the bell stopped, everything went dark. By morning, the village had woke beneath the pale sky, smoke still rising from the chimneys and doors still closed carefully. Mothers counted their children in quiet urgency, but Matthias' bed was empty. There was no footprints that led away from the house, no marks in the snow beyond the fence. Only at the edge of the forest did they find a half-broken switch, buried deep in the ice. But no one retrieved it. The elders said nothing. They only reminded children gently now that some warnings weren't meant to be tested. And every winter after that, when the bells rang in the distance, the children, they stayed close to the fire. Because some things, they don't need to be seen to be real. They only need to be heard. You see, Krampus was never meant to be a monster that lurked in the shadows. He was meant to be a warning. And in folklore that shaped him, Krampus existed because winter demanded certainty. In the isolated mountain communities, obedience, laziness, or defiance were not a minor thing. They were a risk that could cost lives. And Krampus embodied that truth. He embodied the reason to follow. The bells were seen as warnings rather than ambushes. His presence corrected before punishment was necessary. Fear, in its context, was not of cruelty, but of prevention. Where St. Nicholas asked questions, Krampus delivered outcomes, and his presence ensured that the judgment mattered. What unsettles us now is not what Krampus did, but is what he represented. He reminds us that Christmas was once a season of accountability, that generosity was paired with consequence, that survival required discipline, restraint, and obedience. And Krampus didn't act alone, and he didn't act without purpose. He enforced a balance that modern traditions have deliberately forgotten. Today, Krampus serves as a spectrum. He is masked and paraded and costumized, but his meaning still settles the same way. Beneath the performance remains the old idea that someone was watching, and that the warnings that they portrayed, they were real, and that winter didn't forgive mistakes. Krampus was never Santa's opposite. He was part of the story, much as modern storytelling simply chose to forget him, to minimize his brutality so that the narrative was more digestible. But what if I told you that the Santa Claus we recognize today, the gentle, generous, endlessly forgiving, cheery, cherry-nosed man, was only a recent invention, and that most European histories, Christmas figures were not designed for comfort? In early St. Nicholas traditions, Santa was far from gentle. He appeared at night, he entered homes without invitation, and he knew what you had done, not because he was magical, but because communities believed nothing could remain hidden forever. And in early European folklore, Santa was not a symbol of comfort. He was a watcher. The roots of Santa lie with St. Nicholas, a figure remembered less for the joy and more for the judgment. Nicholas believed to arrive unannounced, and often at night entering homes without invitation. He knew which children had behaved properly and which had not. Not because he was magical in the modern sense, as what we would know St. Nicholas as now, but because communities believed that wrongdoings never remained hidden forever. And I'm sure you guys are picturing the song that has become super popular modern day, that he knows when you are sleeping and he knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been good or bad, so be good for goodness sake. Well, that's kind of where that song came from. One of the oldest legends attached to St. Nicholas makes this role fairly clear. In medieval era, he exposed a crime to which children had been murdered and hidden in pickling barrels. Nicholas didn't accuse or investigate. He simply came to the barrels and prayed, and the children were restored to life. The message wasn't of comfort, but of warning, that he could see through walls. He could see what you were trying to conceal. And as a Christmas tradition spread, this watchful role became eternalized into a darker form of punishment. In parts of Germany, Belsnickel arrived alone, distinguished a ragged man, testing children without warning or punishment, but more predictability, that if they lied, he would know. In France, Pierre Foutard followed Nicholas carrying a whip. He was tasked with beating and removing misbehaving children, from homes. These figures were not a contradicting of Santa, they were a partnership. In these traditions, generous punishment was part of life. Reward without consequence was believed to be meaningless, and winter demanded obedience, preparation, and restraint. And therefore Santa, he was a function of authority, and he measured whether or not these standards had been met. But over time, this balance became uncomfortable. The idea that children's innocence were changed by domestic safety became central to how Christmas was celebrated. The punishment aspect of Santa's folklore began to be pushed away, and the enforcers were more demonized in creatures that we see more in Grýla and Krampus. And Nicholas himself became shaped into the holly jolly Santa Claus that we know today. But darker elements never really disappeared. You see, areas of Santa's accountability are still seen in many of the ways we talk to children today. Even with our friendly little elf on the shelf, an extension of Santa to watch over kids and their behavior. Darker folklores of Santa unsettle us because it reveals things that the modern vision hides. That Santa was never a giver, he was a judger. And that these folklore stories still linger because they were an extension and a shaping of what we see as traditions today. So as we reach the end of this episode, it's worth remembering that none of these stories were ever meant to be comforting, as much as we want them to be. They weren't created to delight children and decorate for the season. They were created to explain the dangers and to enforce survival and to shape the fears that we carried through the longest nights of the year. Creatures like the Yule Cat and Grýla warned that idleness and disobedience would cost lives. Krampus reminded communities that behavior was consequence and that winter showed no mercy. And the darker origins of Santa himself reveal that Christmas season was once a season for watching, for judgment, and for accountability long before it came a season of cheer. Over time, these figures have been softened, reshaped, and made more palatable. Fear still gives way, though, to comfort, and judgment still gives way to reward. But the old stories never fully disappear. They linger beneath the surface, an unease that still feels as deep as winter does. And it's what makes us instinctively lock our doors early at night and be a little bit more aware of those who linger too long. Folklore doesn't just vanish, and we don't stop believing. It simply changes shape with its environment. So thank you for joining me on this final Christmas season episode of Let's Talk Spooky. I'm so grateful to each one of you for listening, sharing, and helping this little spooky corner of the world grow. If tonight's story made you look at Christmas a little differently, well, then I've done exactly what I was meant to do. Until next time, stay curious and stay spooky.